And this week we continue with the books of Judges and Ruth under the title, Good News in Chaos. We just had our reading from the opening section of the book of Ruth. This is one of the shortest books in the Bible and only one of two books named after a woman. It tells the story of two widows. At the outset, this doesn't sound like good news at all. But before we go to Bethlehem with Ruth and Naomi, we need to start at the very beginning of the book. Indeed, we need to stop at chapter 1 and verse 1 and the very first phrase in order to establish the context for this story. We read that, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab." So who were these judges? Why were they mentioned as the background for the story of Naomi and Ruth? And what was their role? Before we can answer that, let's go back to what we heard about Joshua last week. Before Joshua died, he reminded the Israelites of the covenant that God had made with Moses, as recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 28. "If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all the commands that I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth, and all these blessings will come upon you. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God, all these curses will come and overtake you." And at the end of the book of Joshua, he reminds the people, "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your forefathers worshipped. Choose for yourself this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Joshua then died and was buried. And we read in Judges chapter 2, "After that whole generation died, another grew up who did not know the Lord or what he had done for Israel. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord handed them over to raiders and enemies, and they were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges to save them from these enemies. Yet the people would not listen to the judges, but turned from obedience to the Lord's commands and worshipped other gods. While each judge lived, the Lord was with him and saved him, having compassion on their suffering. But when the judge died, the people became even more corrupt, refusing to abandon their evil and stubborn ways." Over roughly 350 years, there were about 13 judges. You may have come across some of them: Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, who are named among the faithful and the great cloud of witnesses in Hebrews chapter 11. We should, of course, always mention Deborah, the only female judge and prophetess. Little is recorded about most of the others, apart from their failures. At this point in Israel's history, a judge did not decide legal cases or settle disputes or serve as an early form of king. Their main role was to deliver the Israelites from their enemies. Some acted alone, others led armies. Unlike kings, they had no administrative role. There was no succession, no dynasty. And God raised them up at specific moments in response to the people's cries. A repeated pattern emerges. After peace, the Israelites turned away from God and did evil, worshipping foreign gods, disobeying him, or living by their own rules. They were conquered, cried out to the Lord, and he raised up a judge to rescue them and defeat the enemy. Peace followed, sometimes for up to 80 years. But this cycle kept repeating, leading to a downward spiral of chaos. What can we conclude about the book of Judges? It's disturbing, distressing, and troubling. It should possibly come with a health warning that it's not a book for the faint-hearted, and certainly presents readers, preachers, and scholars alike with some huge ethical dilemmas and conundrums. Chaos seems to describe the majority of the situations and stories, even though there are these glimpses of peace. Some of the judges were people whose characters and ways were exemplary at times, whilst others were not. But we should be aware that God is not restricted to calling just good leaders or godly people in order to accomplish his purposes. In this book, we read about depravity, the worst kinds of behavior that people can display, the depths to which people can descend, and violence, so much violence. Although the people turned their backs on God, repeatedly ignoring his commandments and promises, and although God was tried and tested by them time and time again, God did not give up on them. He was continually offering them lifelines of hope and the possibility of turning back to him. Despite the darkness of the times, God continued to be present and reach into those dark times and into the darkest recesses of people's lives. The truth of the matter was that the people of Israel wanted God to provide them with a king. Judges weren't what they wanted. Why did Israel want a king? Because many of the surrounding nations had kings, and they felt they were missing out. In the first verses of both chapters 18 and 19, we read, "In those days, Israel had no king." And in the very last verse of the book, chapter 21, verse 25, we read, "In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit." This desire to have a king would in due course provide them with King Saul and King David and ultimately Jesus himself. But you'll have to come back next week and the week after and the week after to hear more about the kings. I was heartened at parish prayers last Saturday to say the following refrain after reading one of the Psalms in morning prayer. "Open our ears, glorious Lord Christ, to hear the music of your voice above the chaos of this world. Open our eyes to see the vision of your glory, for you are our King, now and forever." And a comment about the book of Judges. In preparation for today, one commentator I read wrote the following: "May God grant that we learn those lessons from the book of Judges that the Israelites of long ago did not learn." Let's return to the book of Ruth. With that sort of background, it's hardly surprising that there was famine in the land during the time of the Judges. In chapter 1, we read that Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and sons Mahlon and Kilion went to Moab. There the sons married Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, although Israelite men were not permitted to do so. In time, all three men died, leaving three widows, Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah. Grief, fear, and vulnerability overwhelmed them. Widows, especially foreigners, were vulnerable, and Ruth was childless. When Naomi heard that the Lord had provided food for his people in Bethlehem, she reluctantly but boldly decided to return. Her daughters-in-law began the journey with her, but Naomi urged them to go back to Moab. Orpah returned, but Ruth refused. Here is one of the book's key verses. "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." With these words, Ruth turned from her Moabite heritage embraced Naomi's faith, and committed herself to looking after Naomi. When Ruth and Naomi arrived, two things happened. Naomi, reconnecting with those she'd left years before, called herself Mara, meaning bitter. She felt let down by God, disappointed and uncertain of the future. In contrast, the barley harvest was beginning. Naomi knew that her late husband had relatives in Bethlehem, including Boaz, a man of standing. Ruth, needing to make her way in this uncertain new world, took the initiative to glean leftover grain at the edge of a harvested field. She worked diligently, unaware whose field it was. When Boaz arrived, he greeted the harvesters with a blessing. He noticed Ruth and assured her that she could glean there, stay with the servant girls, drink when thirsty, and remain safe, as she had ordered the men not to touch her. Surprised, Ruth asked why he had shown such favor to a foreigner. Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Naomi was amazed by the amount of barley that Ruth had gathered. She recognized Boaz's generosity and told Ruth that he was their relative and kinsman redeemer. Naomi saw Boaz as a good marriage prospect for Ruth, but rather than let matters naturally unfold, she intervened, arranging for Ruth to meet Boaz at the threshing floor. When Boaz discovered her there, he blessed her and explained that although he was a close relative, another kinsman redeemer had a stronger claim, and Boaz needed to speak to him first. What was this kinsman redeemer arrangement? Well, it was a male relative with the legal right and moral duty to help a relative in need or danger. This usually involved taking responsibility for property, buying back land, or rescuing a relative from debt. It could also include marrying a relative's widow and raising children to preserve the deceased husband's name and inheritance. All of this is outlined in Leviticus chapter 25 and is an example of why we need to be familiar with the whole Bible. Boaz met the other relative at the town gate before 10 elders who were witnesses, and he explained the situation regarding Elimelech's property. He said that buying the land from Naomi and Ruth also meant acquiring the dead man's widow to maintain his name with the property. The man declined, fearing it would endanger his own estate, and he urged Boaz to redeem it. So before the witnesses, Boaz announced that he had bought Naomi's property from Elimelech and his sons and had acquired Ruth as his wife, so any children would continue the line of Elimelech and Mahlon. And so the story reaches its happy ever after conclusion. Boaz marries Ruth, and they have a son who they named Obed, and Naomi cared for him. So from the horrors of the time of the Judges, we have this brief, romantic interlude, a love story that started badly but ended up well. We have Ruth, a Moabite, a Gentile, but a woman who had a call on her life which enabled her to willingly leave her own people and follow her widowed mother-in-law to her homeland. An honorable woman, a conscientious and diligent worker, a widow who rediscovered love and bore a child. We have Boaz, an honorable man who worshipped the Lord and aimed to live out the commands given to the Israelites, a man who took his responsibilities under the law seriously. He provided for Ruth and protected her even before she became his wife. Boaz was Ruth's kinsman redeemer, a precursor to Jesus being the kinsman redeemer for all people. We have Naomi, the bitter mother-in-law, widowed, who eventually rejoiced in the birth of her grandson. God answered Naomi's simple and uncomplicated prayers for her daughters-in-law. May the Lord show kindness to you. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. How did he answer her prayer? In his time frame and in his way. He didn't require the impatience of intervention. Where did this all take place? In Bethlehem. There's not much detail about Bethlehem, the place or the people in this particular story, but it can be no coincidence that Bethlehem would be the birthplace of King David, and of course, the birthplace of Jesus. And Bethlehem means house of bread, and it was here, in amongst the chaos of the period, that God provided a good harvest. And of course, we have God. This story is first and foremost about what God did to and through each of these people. God is the leading character in all the lives of these people, even if they weren't fully aware of it. And this story is a microcosm or example of how God works in history, how he sees the bigger picture, even if the individuals don't or can't. So have we found good news? Have we found God in the chaos? Yes, I think we have. I'm sure there are many here who have tracing their family history among their hobbies. If you have, no doubt you've come across dead ends, surprises, black sheep, scandals, unexpected relationships, and hidden gems. Family trees don't just consist of a list of names. Each name is a real person. Each person has their own story to tell, their own part to play in the wider world, and in your family specifically. In order to see God's big picture and Ruth's part in it, we're going to conclude with our gospel reading from Matthew chapter 1 and listen out for some surprises.